Hello and welcome. This is Gina from McGuire, and I'm glad you're here. Today, we're going to take our dies and give them a whole new life by turning them into stamps. The best part is you can do this technique with any type of dies. In today's video, I'll show it with regular dies, coordinating dies, and more. Now, there are many ways you can approach this technique, and I will show you the best way that I found, but also mention others in case you want to try that. All right, let's get started with this first example here, where I take a leaf die and use the die cut, but also use the die to create a stamp. For this, I'm using a new die from Simon Says Stamp called Whirl Leaves. You'll notice after we use it that it creates this fun detail on the leaves that makes it really unique looking. Let's first cut it from regular cardstock. Today I'm demonstrating with my Spellbinders Platinum 6 die cut machine. This has the universal plates in it, but you can do all of these techniques with whatever machine you may have. You'll just have to read the instruction manual. So first I'm cutting this die from white cardstock just so you can see the detail this die gives. You can see that fun pattern on the leaves. If you ever have a die like this that has those detailed lines in it, something you can do to make those details stand out more is to cut it, as I just did, but then make an impression with the die. So I'm following the instructions to make an impression with the die or dry emboss with the die using this machine. It always involves a flexible mat. Mine is gray here, but almost every machine comes with one. So you just want to check the instruction manuals. Again, I'm just dry embossing or making an impression with the die. All right, so you can see here how those little line details are deeper now because we cut and made an impression with it. You could definitely skip that second step and just cut with it and see those detail lines, but adding that little bit of time really makes the lines stand out more. Now that I have shown you that die, again, you could use whatever die you may have. We're going to create a stamp from that same die. To do this, I use craft foam. This is the fun foam we played with as a kid. It's kind of soft. You can get it at most craft stores. I will link to where I get mine below. Now we're going to use that same die and cut this craft foam just like we would do if we were cutting cardstock. So the same way I demonstrated earlier. This craft foam cuts beautifully. Most every craft foam I've ever tried does. And it'll flatten a little bit, but it'll pop up after you give it a few minutes. So now we have turned our die into a stamp. So that piece there can be used as a stamp. If you don't have craft foam, I'll give you some other ideas later on in this video. So I have a piece of 4 1/4 by 5.5 inch white cardstock, and I'm just kind of planning out where I want the pieces to be. That craft foam piece there on the left is what I'll stamp with. This one on top is a die cut that I'll glue on top. So I just kind of have things positioned where I want them to end up. I'm putting that piece into the corner of my stamping tool, removing the die cut so that all that's in there is that craft foam die cut. I'm using a little bit of tape runner to put adhesive along different areas on the back of this leaf. I definitely recommend a dry adhesive for this, and you need very little. You don't need much at all. So that adhesive is facing up towards the camera. I will just close the door on my stamping tool, which will grab that stamp. And the nice thing about this fun foam is you can kind of move it around to get the arch of the leaf that you want just right. Because that fun foam isn't as thick as regular stamps, I need to put a few pieces of cardstock shim underneath the piece I'm stamping on. I think I put 3 pieces under there. That just raises our cardstock a bit. Now you can ink up this foam stamp with whatever inks you want. I'm using Simon Says Stamp saturated inks today because the colors are just gorgeous. And you'll see how I'm able to get really crisp results with that craft foam. You can even see the line details that the die created. Such gorgeous results. Now I wanted to add a little bit of a darker color towards the inside of that stamped image. So I'm adding some darker green with a blending brush right onto the stamp, and I'll stamp it. I realized that color wasn't dark enough to create a contrast, so I'm coming in with an even darker green and doing this again. These foam stamps that we're creating can be saved. So I'll save this foam stamp in with that die in my storage so that if I ever want to do this again, I can. Also, if you don't have a stamping tool, you could definitely use temporary adhesive to put your foam stamp onto an acrylic block and stamp that way. Look at those gorgeous results. It looks like a regular stamp was used to do this, but really you created it from a die. Now here I have a dark green die cut, just cardstock, and I'm applying a darker green towards the center just to give that variation, kind of like we did with the stamping on the foam stamp. I want that leaf that we created from green cardstock to have some dimension to it. So I die cut 2 more green leaf die cuts, and I'm gluing them all together with Gina K Connect liquid adhesive. I like that adhesive because I put it in a fine tip bottle, so I can get it into little nooks and crannies, but any adhesive would work here. So I've stacked those together, and now this die cut has dimension to it, and it'll hold up nicely. It will also pop up more against the stamped leaf we have on our background. At this point, I thought it'd be fun to add some stamping to the white area on the background. You'll see that text stamping. Well, it doesn't overlap the leaves. I didn't want to stamp on top of those leaves because it would cover up some of the detail. So we need to do a bit of masking, but this is another great way to use your dies. I have a piece of Gina K Masking Magic, which is my absolute favorite to mask with. I cut the die from the masking paper, and now I'm laying the mask onto the stamping that we've done. Now it doesn't want to stick really well because my ink is wet still. If I just hit it with a heat gun, it would be fine and stick better, but I'm being a little lazy here. So I just press that masking paper down, and now I have my MISTI stamping tool along with the Brutus Monroe Stick and Stamp Mat. This will hold my paper in place as we stamp on it. I have the Simon Says Stamp UR background stamp, which I've used a lot over the years. I am laying my cardstock face down onto it, making sure it's straight. I close the MISTI upside down onto it, then flip it over, and you'll see my cardstock is stuck to that sticky mat in just the right position to stamp the background stamp straight. I'm inking up the stamp with flannel, which is a nice warm gray, and I'll stamp that right on top of the entire background. Once I'm done stamping, I can remove the mask, save it for later if I want to, and now I have that fun background and all of the white space, but my leaves are still green with all of that detail. Now, along with our stamped leaves and the leaf die cut, I thought it'd be fun to add some little sprigs into it. So I have this new Simon Says Stamp Fur Sprig die, and I'm going to cut it from vellum, but I thought it'd be fun to add color to my vellum. So I'm taking a dye ink, any dye ink would work here, pressing it onto the vellum, and then wiping off the excess. Now you could do this in different ways. So you don't use as much ink. You could use an inking tool or whatever, but this is the fastest. I will heat set that so I'm sure it's dry, but now I have green tinted vellum. I'll use this Fur Sprig die to cut a few pieces, and this will be just a really nice subtle accent to the card. If I used regular vellum without any color to it, it would get kind of lost, so that green tint helps it to stand out more. For sentiment, I'm using the Simon Says Stamp Handwritten Hello die set. This has the word hello and the shadow die. You can see off screen I have die cut and assembled many of those hellos from white and black cardstock because I really like this sentiment so much, so I'll use one of those for today's card. I trimmed a bit off of the sides of this panel just so that I can add it to a note card and the card color will show on the sides. Now we can glue our die cuts in place. I'm starting by putting a little bit of glue on the base of that vellum die cut, and then I will do the same with a second. Then we'll glue the green leaf and the hello on top, which will help to hold the vellum pieces in place. I always try to hide my adhesive when I'm using vellum. I just think it gives the best results. And here, I really think those little vellum sprig pieces add a lot to the layering we have going on here. In fact, I think that die would look great behind lots of different flowers all year round. And the advantage of using liquid adhesive here is I can move things around until I'm happy with it and then give it time to dry. All right, now I thought it'd also be fun to stamp on my matching envelope with that same foam stamp we created from the leaf die. It's still in my MISTI, so I just stuck an envelope in there and I'm stamping it with green. And now my envelope will match my card. I think that's a great way to pull all of it together when you give it to a recipient. All right, here is our completed card. You can see the stamped leaf in the background and then the leaf die cut on top of that. Now I could have just done 2 die cuts there instead of stamping with one, but there are some things that you can do with that foam stamp that's really fun. For example, you could flip that foam stamp over and stamp with the other side, creating a mirror image. Now, to finish off this card, I did add some little butterflies that I cut from a champagne glitter cardstock from Memory Box, and the butterfly dies are also from Memory Box. I use this die a lot because it's a great way to add quick accents onto a floral or leaf piece as I have here. Okay, time for another example, and this again will show how to create your own foam stamps from dies. This time, I'm using an embossing folder and die combo. These are becoming more and more popular, so I wanted to show you other ways to use them. Now, after we use this technique with this embossing folder and die set, I will show you how it was originally intended to be used after it, so stay tuned for that. But first, let's create a foam stamp using these coordinating dies that come with the Simon Says Stamp Gilded Ornamental Embossing Folder. So these are sold together, and there's a lot of ways you can use them. Again, I'm going to show you 2 ways. So I will take those coordinating dies and cut them from white craft foam. If you do not have craft foam, you could instead cut 2 or 3 die cuts from white cardstock and then 1 from vellum. You glue those all together and then ink up the vellum side and stamp with that. Believe it or not, it will work. But craft foam is definitely faster and easier to do. All right, now for the embossing folder here, I just want to demonstrate what it looks like with regular cardstock. So this is white cardstock. I'm running this through my Spellbinders machine. I find the platform, the B plate, and then a cardstock shim works great with this 3D embossing folder, but you'll have to experiment with whatever machine you may have. I love these beautiful results. Now I'm going to use this piece here as a guide to do my stamping on our card. So I'm putting this piece into the corner of my stamping tool, along with 3 pieces of cardstock to build up that height, just acting as a shim. Because remember, craft foam is thinner than clear stamps, so we need to put those shims under our cardstock. Now I have my craft foam die cuts and I'm putting a little bit of tape runner onto them. Now notice I keep the adhesive facing up towards the camera, but I pick up these little foam die cuts and I line it up with the pattern on that white cardstock piece. So that I just followed the embossed pattern that we created. It's pretty easy to do. The adhesive is facing up, so I'll close the door on my stamping tool to grab that stamp, and then I'll do the same with the other. So now I know these are positioned just right to stamp onto my cardstock background, and it'll line up with the embossing folder that I use later. So I have a piece of Hero Arts Lapis cardstock here. It's one of my favorite colors. It's beautiful. And I'm stamping with violet ink onto it. So I've inked up my stamp. I was a little messy there. You don't need to be that messy. I don't know what I was doing, but I will go ahead and stamp that. And look how well it stamps. I just wanted a tone-on-tone look. If you're finding it's not stamping well, put more shims underneath your paper to make it kind of reach the stamp better. All right, now it's time to use the embossing folder. I do like to mist the back side of that cardstock with water, the side that doesn't have the ink, just so it allows the embossing folder to give more texture. I'm lining up my stamping with the embossing folder. You can see right through it, and then I'll run that through my die cut machine. By the way, you don't need to spray your cardstock with water. I just find it helps to give a deeper impression, but always spray on the back side if you have ink on the front. If there's no ink, you could spray both sides. All right, so now you can see how that stamping lines up with the embossing. All right, now I'm going to dry this because we did spray it with water, and then I will put it onto my stick and stamp mat just to hold it in place. Now this next step is very optional, but it helps to make that texture, the embossed texture, show up more. I have white pigment ink here, and I'm using my Tim Holtz brayer to pick up some of that white pigment ink and then gently roll it over the textured background. So all of the raised areas will grab onto that ink, and the areas between the raised will stay that blue. So notice how quickly you can see the pattern more. It's just beautiful. If you wanted to, you could do this with a darker color of ink, but I feel like the white highlights really help to make it stand out. So I will heat this with a heat gun just to dry that white ink. Pigment ink stays wet a little bit longer and we don't want that to smear. Look at those gorgeous results. I trimmed that panel down and added it to a 4 1/4 by 5.5 inch white top folded note card. And now I'm adding a snowflake to the center. You could skip this if you wanted to, but I'm using the new Simon Says Stamp Aidan Snowflake. I cut it twice from white cardstock, once from silver cardstock, glued them together for dimension, and then added it to the center of that snowflake pattern. For my sentiment, I used the Simon Says stamp Simple Holiday Greetings. I stamped Sending You Holiday Hugs, but I'm using a Gina K design sentiment strip die to cut out just the words Holiday Hugs. I find these dies are really great for cutting out a lot of different sentiments. They have different length dies included, and it worked great here. I cut out the sentiment with one of the dies, and then I cut an extra cardstock piece to glue behind it to give it some strength and dimension, and I'll glue that right on top of our snowflake. Now we can take a look at the completed card. I did add some silver gemstones from Trinity stamps to that snowflake to make it stand out more. You can also see that bit of darker stamping that we did with our foam stamp, which really helped to make that pattern stand out even more. You could totally skip it, but it gives definition to that snowflake. Now, before we move on to more ideas for creating stamps from your dies, I just wanted to show you quickly how this embossing folder and die combo was really meant to be used. So this doesn't use the dies as stamps technique, just taking a little break here to show how this was intended to be used. So I have a piece of cardstock here along with die cuts and the embossing folder. I'm going to spray both sides of this cardstock piece with water, just a little mist, so that I can really get a deep impression from the embossing folder. Now I'll run that through my die cut machine. By the way, sometimes I do my embossing folders sideways like this. It really doesn't matter. I'm just find I get great results this way, but do whatever works for you. Look at those beautiful results. Now I'll mist this die cut with some water, and I'll line it up in the embossing folder. It's really easy to see through and line it up with the pattern, and I'll run that piece through, and then I will do the same with the little flower. I really like the results of this little flower here, and I think this could be used all year round. Add some little leaf die cuts to it, and you have these textured flowers that work for a lot of different things. All right, so now we can glue all this together. I do want to heat set it. It's always best to heat set things before you apply glue. I trimmed that pink down, and I'm adding it to a 4 1/4 by 5.5 inch note card. I get pretty generous with where I put my adhesive when something has texture to it, because I want to make sure that it makes contact. I don't put thick amounts of adhesive down, but I put a thin amount down in a lot of area. All right, now I can add the little flower shape to the center, then the other shape around that. It lines up easily with the texture on the light pink piece. And there you have kind of how I think this embossing folder and die was intended to be used. So now there's 2 great ideas for this one set. So if you have any embossing folders with coordinating dies, you can try these ideas. Now this one I finished off by adding the holiday hugs, once again, the silver snowflake and the silver gems. So very similar design to the last one, but this one doesn't have that white pigment ink, and it has the layers of the cardstock instead of the stamping. Okay, back to the idea of creating our own stamps from our dies. This time, we'll also make an impression with the die. So we'll do some stamping, some die cutting, and make an impression all together on one card. It's kind of hard to see in the video, but in real life, it stands out. Now you could use pretty much any die for this technique. I'm using the Simon Says stamp Snowflake Medallion. Now I am going to cut this from craft foam. That's the piece you see here. And I kind of kept it in my die so it held the die in shape as I put a little bit of adhesive here and there on the craft foam. Notice I'm putting very little down. You don't need a lot, just enough so it'll stick to the door of your stamping tool. All right, so now I'm going to take that die cut, the foam die cut, and put it where I want it to stamp onto my cardstock panel there. The adhesive is still facing up. I then can close the door on my stamping tool to grab that stamp, and we're ready to do our stamping. I do need to take out those little negative pieces that are inside of this die cut. I had left those in so that my craft foam piece didn't like take a weird shape. I wanted to keep it that nice, even looking shape. That's something that you got to keep in mind when you create a craft foam die cut. If you want it to stay better shape, you could always do the trick of 3 pieces of cardstock die cut, then vellum on top and stamp with the vellum side. All right, so now this is ready to stamp. I put shims underneath my blue piece, and I'm stamping that with Simon Says Stamp Royal ink, such a beautiful color. I'll do that a few times to make it even darker against my dark cardstock background. Now, I thought it'd be fun to dry emboss with the die right on top of the stamping we just did. So I'll take the die and line it up with the stamping we've done, the best that I can do, and I'll tape it in place. Now we'll make an impression with this die, kind of like we did earlier in this video. I am setting up my machine with the instructions that come with it. In this case, I have a gray flexible mat that I put my cardstock and die on. Again, just look at your instruction manual for your machine and follow along with whatever it says to do to dry emboss or make an impression with a die. And look at that. It adds such fun texture around the stamping. It really stands out more in real life, but it does add some fun to that simple stamped image. Off screen, I die cut the same die from a champagne glitter cardstock from Memory Box and twice from white cardstock, glued those all together for dimension, and then glued it offset on top of the stamping and impression we've already done, so you can see the results there. I also added a thanks sentiment to the center, but I created the thanks word from the blue cardstock, but it was a little too light. I wanted it to be darker. So I just took that same ink pad, pressed it on the blue cardstock to make a darker area, and I die cut from that. And now I'll glue that on top. So now we have a darker thanks. Remember, you can always ink up your cardstock, and that way your cardstock will match the stamping that we did on the background there. By the way, that thanks is from Altenew. All right, so I finished this off by adding some pearls to the snowflake pattern just to make it stand out a bit more. Here you can see the stamping that we did in the background along with the impression. Yes, I did cover up quite a bit of it by putting that glitter die cut on top, but in real life it really adds quite a bit to the simple card design. I will say this particular technique works really well with a background die. You create your own foam stamp from that background die and stamp with it. Then make an impression with that die on top of it, and it looks so cool. I'll be sure to do that in a future video. But now I have one more card for you, and this one is how you can do this technique with your coordinating dies for whatever stamp set you may have. This is a fun way to be able to stamp with color on a darker color cardstock. I'm using the Simon Says Stamp Holiday Floral Stamp Set. This isn't a layering set, but rather a building set. You stamped images close together, and it creates really great results. You'll see in a moment. But you could also do this with regular layering stamps. Any kind of solid or layering set would work. All right, so I have a piece of paper bag cardstock from Lawn Fawn. It's one of my favorite dark craft cardstocks. And I used the coordinating dies for that floral stamp set to cut from craft foam. These are all craft foam pieces. I'm putting a little bit of adhesive on each of those die cuts. You can see how little I'm using. Then I will close the door on my stamping tool, and that will grab the die cuts. And now we've kind of created our own background using these craft foam die cuts. I do need to put some shim behind that brown piece there just so that it reaches the stamps better. And I'm going to ink up my little stamps here with white pigment ink. Now I'm using Ink on 3, but Hero Arts, Gina K, they all have great white pigment inks. Now I'll stamp this once, and you'll see my ink pad's getting a little dry. So I stamped it a few more times and even put in another shim under there because I don't feel like I'm making good contact with my cardstock. So I'll stamp this a few more times. That'll give me some bright white images. Then we can stamp with color on top. So if your white ink pad looks a little dry, remember there are reinkers available for all of our favorite white pigment inks. It's a good ink pad to re-ink often. Now we can use the stamps in that building stamp set. So I'm taking the largest ones first and lining the stamps up with the white stamping we've already done. I will now ink this up with any dye or pigment ink would work here. So with Distress Oxides or Distress ink, I'm just using regular dye inks here. So I stamped that with red ink, and you can see how the red stands out more than it would if you would have stamped it directly on the brown paper alone. By putting that white stamping first, it allows you to have more true color against the colored cardstock. So I did the first layer of this, or the first image for these florals. Now I'm doing the second one, and you can see how they fit into the stamping we've already done very easily, allowing you to build these images. So they don't actually layer, they kind of are stamping next to each other. So I'm using different shades of red here, and we'll end up with these beautiful reddish pink flowers in the end. I also like that there's that white highlight around our stamping, which really gives a unique look. And that really can only be achieved by creating your own stamps from the coordinating dies. So I continued to stamp with the greens on top of the other images, added the little red berries, and in the end, we have this great colorful background. Now I did decide to trim this down, and I thought I was going to leave it at this point. But again, I love the look of that text stamping in the negative space. So we're going to do that again like we did on our first example. So I use my masking magic along with the coordinating dies, and I'll put the little mask shapes on top of our stamping. Once again, make sure that you've heat set your stamping, not only so it won't smear, but also so that the mask will stick to it. Now I have my stick and stamp mat in my stamping tool along with the background stamp. I'll lay my panel face down onto that stamp, making sure it lines up. Then I'll close my MISTI upside down, flip it over, and our panel will stick to that stamp and stick mat. And now I know that when I stamp with this background stamp, it'll be straight. Now, you don't always have to do that, but since this is text, I want to make sure it's straight or it'll look kind of off. Or you could just put it at an angle intentionally. Totally up to you. All right, so I'm putting all the rest of the mask down, and then I will stamp over this using cappuccino ink. This is a nice brown on top of that brown background. And I'll stamp that a couple times to make sure I get into the nooks and crannies of the mask. Now I can remove those masks, save it with my stamp set so I can use them again later, and check out that fun background. Really, this came together much better and stands out even more because we did that white stamping with our DIY stamps first. I finished this off by adding it onto a white note card, and I again used the Simon Says Stamp Handwritten Hello die set. I also added some Pink Fresh Studio gold glitter drops. Those are those little glitter gems there, just for a bit of sparkle. I really like this paper bag stamping look. I think it's such a fun kind of nostalgic look, especially for the holidays. So this technique of creating stamps with your coordinating dies can be done with a variety of stamp sets. All right, there you have fun ideas for using your dies creatively and using them as stamps. If you are interested in supplies I use, I always have them linked below. At the end here, I'll link to a couple other related videos for more inspiration. Thanks for spending this time with me, and I'll see you again very soon with another video.